Hey there, and welcome to part number 3 of the Projects to Stock Your Shop series over at B.Hooked. And in this third and final pattern, we're going to be working on what I'm calling the perfect knit cowl. Why is it perfect, you might ask? Well, it works up quick, it uses very little yarn, and it's a project that your customers will actually want to wear. You can have a look at it here behind me. I love this cowl. I hope that you love it too. We're going to be using a unique stitch, something I haven't taught on my channel before. Now, before we dive into the tutorial today, I want to let you know that the written instructions and the supplies list can be found over on my website at bhookedcrochet.com/perfectcowl. You can find all the information you need to know in order to follow along with me today. And without further ado, let's just dive right in. So the first thing we need to do is cast on 22 stitches. Honestly, you can use whatever cast on method you prefer. I like to use the long tail cast on, so I'm going to get myself a nice long tail here. Then loop that in half, so tail on this side, working yarn, or coming from the ball of yarn right there. I'm just going to allow that to drape over my needle, secure it with my fingers, fasten it up in my hand like this. Loop it around, catch the one on my thumb, loop it around, catch the one on my index finger, and then release my thumb over the tip of the needle. Now once again, this is the long tail cast on, and I do have a very beginner friendly tutorial on this technique if you are brand new to knitting and you need a slightly slower version that explains a little bit more. I recommend you check out that resource. You can find that at bhookedcrochet.com/longtail. And we're just going to do that until we have 22 loops on our needle, or 22 stitches cast on. And once you have 22 stitches cast on your needles, we can go ahead and flip it over, and we're going to work a knit row for row number 1. Now this particular stitch pattern that we're working with has a 4-row repeat. We're going to cover each of the 4 rows in depth here, starting with the first row. Once again, that is just a knit row, so we just need to find our first stitch, insert our needle knitwise, loop that around and pull it through to knit the first stitch, and repeat that for each one of our stitches. We'll maintain our stitch count of 22, so you can go ahead and count that as you go or when you get to the end of the row, just to make sure you're on the right track. Now for row number 2, what we need to do is knit the first stitch, and now we're going to work with knit 2 together stitches. It's going to feel a little bit strange because we're going to decrease our stitch count significantly for this row, but we will make up for it in row number 3. So to knit 2 together, you just want to find your next 2 stitches, and you'll insert your needle knitwise into both of those stitches. Wrap your yarn and knit just as if it were one stitch. So that completes the first one, and what I like to do is just kind of pull on it. That'll get my tension and get the stitch a little bit straighter and looking a little nicer. And then we will knit 2 together for the next 2 as well. And we're actually going to repeat this until we only have 1 stitch remaining on our needle, and when that's the case, we'll just knit that last stitch. So we're knitting each of the edge stitches. So we knit one at the beginning. On the first stitch, we're going to knit the last stitch, and every stitch in between is going to be a knit 2 together. Now one little tip that I have for you as well is we have a natural tendency to make our knit 2 together pretty tight. And so what I like to do, you'll see me kind of wiggle my needle in there all the way to this widest point here. That's going to help stretch out these 2 stitches so it makes it a little easier. And when I wrap, I keep it nice and loose. And then when I pull it off, I also go ahead and just kind of tug on it to just straighten things out. This is going to make our life a lot easier when we get back to row number 3 and we have to make up for this decrease. All right, now I'm at the end and I just have 3 stitches left. I'm going to knit 2 of those together. And then knit the last stitch as normal. So we've made it now to the end of row number 2, and we're halfway through our stitch repeat. We have 2 more rows, and we're going to move on to row number 3. So we'll flip our work once again. And we are going to knit the first and the last stitch on row number 3 as well. So rows 2 and 3, we're always going to knit the first and last stitch. Just an easy way to help you remember the stitch pattern. But you'll remember we decreased a whole bunch over that last row. We've pretty much decreased our stitch count by half. And so we need to make up for that. Since we decreased by 1 stitch every single stitch that's in between our first and last, we need to add 1 for each one of those stitches. And we're going to do that with a technique called a knit front back. So the knit front back is quite simple actually. It probably sounds more complicated than it actually is. We're just going to insert our needle knitwise as we normally would, wrap it and pull it through, but we're not going to release it from the needle. If we were just knitting like normal, we would go ahead and pull that over and move on to the next one. But now we need to knit through the back. So this is where the knit front back comes into play. We just knit through the front, that part right here, and we need to knit through the back, which is over here. So I'm just going to swing my needle around so that I can see this. It's the same stitch, but it's just the back of that stitch. And I'll insert my needle into that loop, wrap the yarn, and pull it through. Then I can slide it off my needle. And now I have 2 stitches where I only had 1. So we'll look at that one more time. Find your next stitch, insert it knitwise, wrap the yarn, pull it through, but don't slide it off. Then swing your needle around the back, insert it into that back loop of the same stitch, wrap the yarn, and then knit it through. And we're going to do that knit front back for all of the stitches until we get to this very last one. We're just going to knit that one as normal. Now I've made it to my last stitch. I'm going to knit this one, just a regular knit, and that's going to finish row number 3. Now to make sure you're on the right track, go ahead and count your stitches. We should have a total of 22 stitches now on our needle. Now this is what our work looks like at the end of row number 3. We can't see much of the stitch pattern yet, but we're well on our way. We have just one more row remaining in order to finish up our stitch repeat, and to do that we're just going to flip our work and set ourselves up to purl. So when we're purling, remember we have to keep our working yarn to the front and we insert our needle from back to front. So it's exactly opposite of what we do for knit stitches. And for this row, it's quite simple. Just like row number 1, we knitted every stitch. Well, for row number 4, we're going to purl every stitch. All right, now that we finished row number 4, we've actually completed our first stitch pattern repeat. So I'm going to flip it over because this is the right side of the work. And we can see just a tiny bit of our stitch pattern, but we will get to see a lot more of that as we go. So after you've worked up a few stitch pattern repeats, this is what it's going to start to look like. We should see a nice bumpy little ridge from where we do our knit 2 together and our knit front back row. You'll see that is basically those 2 rows are what's making up this texture here. And then our knit and purl row is what we see in between. It's just that traditional stockinette look. So what you'll need to do at this point is continue with your stitch pattern repeat rows 1 through 4. Just follow directly along with the written instructions for the exact number of repeats and measurement. And the next thing we're going to do is change colors. Now this is an optional step. If you would like a single colored scarf, you can just go ahead and continue working up until you've reached that full length as indicated in the pattern. But it does add a pretty cool look to change colors in between. Now once again, if you missed it at the beginning of the video, you can access the written instructions at bhookedcrochet.com/perfectcowl. And that's where you'll find the instructions for your repeat. And when we pick up next, I'll demonstrate that color change for you. All right, once your cowl measures approximately 20 inches long, you want to make sure that you have completed a full stitch pattern repeat. So that means I ended on a purl row here and I'm ready to knit the next row to start off a new repeat. That's where we're going to change colors. And all we need to do is go ahead and trim the working yarn. Now adding on a new ball of yarn or changing to a new color is really quite simple. I'm going to insert my needle knitwise because I'm starting again on a knit row. And I just want to take my new yarn, fold it over, and then place that on my needle and knit the first stitch with that new color. Now the one thing you will notice is that things are going to be a little bit loose. So what I do right at the start is take my 2 tails and tie them together. So I'm tying the tail from the first color, tying it with the tail on the new color. So now all I'm doing is knitting my first row of this new stitch pattern repeat with my new color, and that's all there is to it. It's that simple to change colors or to add a new ball of yarn. Now we will circle back around a little bit later to talk about weaving in these ends and the finishing techniques, but for now what you'll need to do is work up the remainder of your cowl, the remaining length of your cowl. So in the written instructions you'll find that we're going to knit up the same length in color B that we worked with color A. So you're going to work your same stitch pattern repeat rows 1 through 4 over and over until this new section measures about 20 inches. When that's the case, again, you're going to stop after your 4th row. So you're going to stop after a purl row, and then we're going to pick up with the bind off right after that. So once you've knit up the full length of your cowl, we're ready for the bind off. And the one thing I want to mention here is that you want to make sure that you have stopped on a 3rd row. So we kind of have that bumpy ridge, and the next row we would do is a purl row. But in order to match the starting edge here, we're going to skip that row and just do the bind off next. Now we want to bind off in a knit stitch pattern. And to bind off, all we need to do is knit the first 2 stitches. And this is just a simple standard knitting bind off. Then we want to take this first stitch and pull it over the second one that we made. So just stick your hook under that, give it a nice tug to get yourself some slack. I always guide this loop as well so I don't drop it off my needle, and pull it over. Now we're going to knit the next stitch. Pull that first one over the second one. And this is our repeat. We're just going to go back and forth with this where we have 2 stitches on our needle, then we'll bind one off, then we'll knit one, and repeat. So now that you have your scarf completely knit, there's just a couple finishing things that we need to do before we can call it done. The first thing we're going to do is weave in some of these ends. Now you will have a couple of ends from your color transition and one on each side for the cast on and the bind off. So to weave in your ends, you'll just thread it on your darning needle and make sure you're working on the back or the wrong side of the work. And the texture looks quite different here on the wrong side than it does the right side. And what I do is honestly just try to find a nice dense portion of stitches where I can just sort of weave my needle around so that I'm kind of weaving it around each one of the stitches. So I'll go in one direction for a little bit and then I'll return in the other direction just to really help secure things even more. And then once you're certain it's nice and secure, you can go ahead and trim that off and move on to the next one. So the other thing we need to do is add in that knot. We need to do that before we stitch the two ends together to make our lives just a little bit easier. And the way we're going to do that, I want to try to situate the knot so that it's right over this color transition. And I'm really just treating this like I would a piece of yarn or a string or something like that. And I'm literally just tying it in a knot. Now, of course, I have some ends to weave in. I will deal with those in just a little bit. But the idea is to have the knot kind of in the middle so I can see some of the purple on this side and some of the white on this side, and I'll just play with it a little bit until I get it situated in the perfect position. And then once you have that squared away, I have the right side facing up, so I'm just paying attention to that bumpy texture. And I want to flip the two ends over because I want to sew it with the right side facing in. It'll give me a little bit cleaner of a look. And you can take either tail. So we left a nice long tail from the bind off edge, but I also still have a nice long tail from my cast on edge as well. So I'm going to use that tail. Then what I want to do is find the first stitch on the opposite side and work my needle under that. And there's a couple of different seaming techniques. Honestly, you can use whichever one you want. I'm a little less concerned with having an invisible join, so I'm just going to work with just a standard stitch. I'm going to go back and forth rather than use a whip stitch. I'm just going to go back and forth. Now, another little tip is to make sure that you're lining your stitches up, because once you get to this end edge, you want to make sure that the ends line up. However, a lot of times our cast on edge is a little bit more loose than our bind off. And you can kind of see that here. My stitches are just a little more loose over here and they're a little tight over there. So just doing a self check every few stitches to make sure that you are on the right track and that things are lining up. It's going to save you some time. And then once I get to the end, I can go ahead and weave it in along this purple section so my end matches. And there you have it. If you have any questions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments section on my website. You can access that page once again at BHookedCrochet.com/perfectcowl. I'm here to help, and I'm happy to guide you through any problems or issues that you might face with this project. Now, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and check out part 2 and part 1 of this 3-part knitting series. It may have come to a close now after this project. All 3 projects to this knitting series are going to live on my website forever, so you can access them anytime you need a quick and easy project to either stock your shop, your market tables, and gift ideas, right? They make great stocking stuffers, great last minute gift ideas. I want to say a big thanks to my sponsor, Red Heart Yarns, for allowing this series to come to life. I'm also very grateful for you because you show up, you watch my tutorials, you put them into action, and you share your successes with me on social and right here on YouTube. So thank you so much for that. If this is one of the first videos that you're finding of mine, I would ask that you hit that like button if you found this video tutorial helpful. And if you haven't done so already, perhaps you can just subscribe to the B.Hooked YouTube channel and you can be alerted anytime I publish a brand new video about the hobbies we both love. Thank you so much, guys. I'll see you next time.